Well, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian Whittaker. I'm the Assistant Director for Programmes at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We're pleased to welcome this evening's panellists, Helga Barth, Ted Bromand, Steve Clemens, Katerina Sakou, and Luigi Zingales. This evening we are on the record. We're live streaming. We welcome social media, but please silence your phones before we begin. The Council, as many of you know, is a membership organisation. If you're a member, thanks for your support, which helps us to continue to produce affordable, accessible and independent content. If you're not a member, I hope you will consider joining one of our membership levels. They begin at $100. For nearly a century, the Council on Global Affairs has provided an independent, non-partisan platform for a variety of different perspectives to promote deeper global understanding and active US engagement in the world. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and didn't... Sorry, is it not loud enough? My apologies. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. Very quickly, some timely upcoming programme highlights I wanted to mention. May 16th, Henri Barkey of the Wilson Centre and Stephen Cook of the Council on Foreign Relations will discuss Turkey's changing politics. And on May 22nd, Gideon Rachman of the Financial Times will discuss his new book on the rise of Asia. Turning back to this evening's programme, after the panel discussion we'll open up to your questions. We'll take those from the room but also from our online platform. Just type chi.cnf.io straight into your browser. You should see it on that screen over there as well. And you can ask a question and also vote on other people's questions. So by way of very quick introduction of our panellists, you'll also should see bios on that screen soon. Our panellists are from the very far side, we have Luigi Zingales. He's the Robert R. McCormick Distinguished Service Professor of Entrepreneurship and Finance at the Booth School of Business. Next to Luigi, we have Katerina Sakou. She's the Washington correspondent for the Greek daily newspaper Kathy Marini. Next is Theodore Bromand. He's the Senior Research Fellow in Anglo-American Relations at the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Next in is Helga Barth. She's Minister and Head of Political Affairs at the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in DC. And our moderator today is Steve Clemens. He's the Washington Editor-at-Large at The Atlantic. So please join me in welcoming this evening's panellists.
Thank you very much, Ian. I want to thank everybody for inviting us to your local pub here. I realize that you're really here for the drinks, and we're the sideshow up here with the. So hello to the bartender. We should bring some wine up here for ourselves. Maybe have a drinking game on something like Brexit or something. When I was reminded that the title of the session today was Europe, Year of Destiny. I don't know who writes your titles, but wouldn't make it in the Atlantic. But I thought maybe we could write Europe, worse than you think, or buy Europe now because it's about to get better. You know, I think that what I wanted to open up with in our conversation is that these are not casual conversations. Europe is right now at some kind of inflection point or points. We've seen, of course, Brexit. We came close to a Grexit. We have a refugee crisis that continues to build, even if the headlines are not focused on that. You have a very interesting relationship developing between the President of the United States and Russia. One of the key strategic objectives of Russia is a split in the Western Alliance. And if you haven't gotten your Washington Post alert, there's a new article that appeared 15 minutes ago on Donald Trump sharing highly, highly classified information with the Russian foreign minister and Russian ambassador on the day he fired James Comey that involved a potential ISIS attack. Levels of classification and information that we had not yet shared with other allies. So the transatlantic relationship is one that is complex right now, and it's interesting. And I just really wanted to start with Ted, because Ted, I know what was not described with you being a Heritage Foundation. You actually live in London, and while you did not advise on the front end of Brexit, you were, at least from your Twitter feed, an enthusiast for Brexit. And have become an advisor since. And I guess I just wanted to sort of start with you for a moment and ask, you know, in your vision for Brexit, one of the key things I'd like you to sort of look at what Europe means now, given the exit of the UK from so many institutions or that process. And secondly, I'm interested in Brexiteers and how they look at the rest of Europe. Would you have been enthusiastic about a Marine Le Pen win in France? Do you look at other countries breaking away from Europe as something that validates your views in England? Or do you think that Europe is fine to remain as a whole and Britain go off? So help us understand that dynamic and tell us what we should most know about that step.
Well, let's start with one of the last questions first. I definitely would not have been enthusiastic about a Le Pen win. There are all sorts of reasons for that. Her economic programs do not commend themselves to me. She is an avowed anti-American, and I believe very firmly in the transatlantic security alliance. So that is another reason why I think her win would have been undesirable. On the larger questions of Brexit and the relationship to other nations in the EU, there's a huge disparity between many member nations of the European Union. Britain has a very distinct history, a very distinct set of relations with the EU. I was surprised by the outcome of the Brexit vote. My prediction was 48% the other way, so I did not think it was going to happen, although I did think it would be fairly close. If I had to sum up the British attitude towards the EU in a couple of words, and of course within Britain itself there are a great many attitudes, I would say that for Britain, Europe above all represents failure. It represents the era of the late 1960s and the early to middle 1970s when Britain went into what was then the EEC. It represents diminished post-World War II expectations and realities because the 73 to 75 period in Britain was very bad. For some of the rest of Europe, the EU still represents success or recovery after World War II. Now that may be changing as a result of economic realities, as a result of geopolitical realities, as a result of things like the refugee crisis. So I would resist any sort of broad generalizations across all the European countries and try to at least break them up regionally, but in many cases down to the individual nation concerned.
Well, thank you. Before we got Brexit, we had the threat of Grexit. And Katerina, you were featured prominently in a Tom Friedman article a few years ago, where he starts the article saying, "I met this young lady, Katerina," and you didn't know where it was going to go after that. But he shared this experience of being in Athens, I guess, with you when German finance officials were coming to do an exploratory tour, if you will, not for tourism reasons, but to sort of test the solvency of one of the domains of Europe, and it was described brilliantly. And I saw a prominent Financial Times writer around that time, and he said that Germany, Martin Wolf, did not understand its hegemonic responsibilities in Europe, and that it was not actually jumping in. It'll be interesting. I'm going to come back to Helga for a moment to see if Germany has realized its hegemonic responsibilities in Europe. But at that time, before Brexit occurred, there were deep internal tensions about a two-speed Europe. You've written a lot about this. Are they resolved? Are the lessons that you saw at that time Friedman profiled you resolved now inside Europe?
So the Tom Friedman article was bringing up the lack of trust within the European Union and within the Eurozone that Brexit, the Greek crisis initiated. And of course it wasn't just the Greek crisis, it was a series of crises in many Eurozone countries that are not intrinsic to Greece. But the fact that the crisis started from Greece actually vilified Greece to a certain extent. And this is something that you could see from both sides of the spectrum, a lack of trust among countries that was brought to the fore because of the crisis. So yes, we're wiser, I think. 7 years have gone by, and some of the problems are still there, including some aspects of the lack of trust and some aspects of building the architecture to support ourselves within the Eurozone, despite the fact that we have different economies and we have to align them better. But at the same time, I have to say that
But are you saying you don't feel like a second-class citizen any longer inside Europe?
We do. I think most Greeks do. I think this has to do mostly with the management of the crisis rather than the actual, and of course the effect of the crisis that it has had in Greece. But I think it has less to do with the euro and being part of the euro. It has more to do with the depth of the crisis itself in Greece, the sheer volume of the discrepancy there, and at the same time the management of the crisis, the fact that the debt wasn't restructured earlier, the fact that the architecture wasn't there for a smooth management of the crisis without the vilification process as well.
Helga, Germany, you've got an election coming up. Allegedly, Donald Trump handed Angela Merkel a bill during his meeting with her about the money. Do you remember this little incident? I don't know if we've ever had a German official actually formally say that Donald Trump had handwritten a bill handed to Angela Merkel on what he felt Germany owed the United States for NATO. It was a very backwards kind of moment that leaked out, at least in the German press. But I'm interested in the story of Germany right now, because so many of us have admired Angela Merkel's view on the refugees, of standing forward, of really trying to maintain an open Europe, trying to encourage Britain not to leave, trying to basically create the right currents inside France. But there is also these issues of legacies of tensions inside, most of it about financial discipline, which is another way of saying that others in Europe don't meet Germany's very high standards. And I'm interested in both the things that hold Germany's role in holding Europe together and Germany's vices in driving Europeans away.
I start off in complimenting myself in getting the Brexit referendum right. I won a bottle of very expensive wine from California because I said they're going to vote for Brexit. And unfortunately, I was right. I was right on a couple of other things. For example, elections yesterday in one of the German federal states, actually the most important one, where Chancellor Merkel's party won, and the candidate for prime minister is not really is not a populist, but a very mild-mannered, soft-spoken intellectual, I would say. So not everything is that bad in Europe, I would say. Le Pen has not won the vote. Lots of people have voted for a fairly young, new French president. We don't know what his political base is. So I found that quite extraordinary, how people have trusted him, and Marine Le Pen has been around for quite a while. And there have been so many terrorist attacks, so I think there was ample reason to think that she might gain much more votes, and of course we were very nervous about that. So Germany about the hegemon. Well, this is a fun story because we just don't want to be the hegemon. We have been
the reluctant hegemon.
Yeah, we have been the big kid on the block, way too big for the others. And for us, it's important. And this, I think, this is really about our identity to cooperate with others, and rather to make us smaller than the 82 million we are, and the largest economy of Europe. That's all true. But we are not the EU, nor can we deliver the EU. We cannot deliver other member states. Of course, Germany can exert an influence, but others can do the same. I'm happy about Brexit, in a sense, because perhaps we are the reluctant hegemon, but the UK has been the reluctant European for such a long time. So perhaps, I mean, it's going to happen. So let negotiations start.
You know, one of the, before I jump to Luigi, one of the interesting realities, how many of you have been to Europe lately?
Oh, that's quite
Put your hand, a lot, because it's such a deal right now, right? It's so cheap. And it's, I mean, whether you go to London, where you go to anywhere, I mean, the euro, I remember when we would talk about, there was a time where you would talk about eurosclerosis in the 1990s. And as the momentum for the euro built, then there was this euro dynamo that was going to take over. And if you remember the euro-dollar exchange rate, which I do, it was not pleasant. And I think it got up. We probably got real finance people here, but it was up at like 180. And people were, those of us who went to Europe frequently didn't like spending $75 for pretty crappy fish and chips and whatnot. And that was in the UK, which was not the euro. But euro, the whole European area was now it's down. Luigi, you held a conference, and I was intrigued with this, that brought together foe and fans. You're from Italy, although you teach here at the Booth School. And I'm interested in anyone that does a 360-degree discussion on these institutions is sort of bringing together an automatic civil war. And I know the conference you did was controversial, but how did it come out? Give us a quick synopsis of your Euro moment.
So I think it's very important to distinguish between Europe and the Euro. Mm-hmm. Okay, Europe was about a great idealistic project on the one hand, and a very successful.
You say that in the past tense.
Yes, for a reason, and a very successful market system. I think that until Europe was about market, worked very well. Then a decision was made. It was a political decision to basically jump the gun and create a common currency in an area that had no condition to be a common currency area, with no institution necessary to run it. And this was not a mistake, was understood very well. And, the Italian Prime Minister at the time gave a famous interview on the FT in 2001 saying that the institutions to support the common currency do not exist, but a crisis will come, and was very prescient on that. A crisis will come, and the institutions will be created as we go along. Okay? Now, on the first part was very prescient. On the other one, we're still waiting. And in the meantime, there are countries, and of course, I'm very affected by my country of origin, but Greece is not doing any better, where sort of 50% of the young people are unemployed, where all the people with a brain are leaving, where basically there is no future. And all this was done, in a sense, in my debate, there was nobody really defending the euro on economic ground. They said, this is a political project to bring Europe closer. But the reality is, ain't working in that dimension, because 15 years ago, 17 years ago, before we introduced the euro, I think that no German will call the Greek lazy, and no Greek would call the German Nazi. Now we do.
Yes, they did.
So they are calling them lazy even back then? I think that's the problem, because, you know, look at Mississippi. Mississippi is not much different than Greece, but no American will dare to call the people in Mississippi
That's what we
lazy.
call a tweetable moment. Mississippi has a lot of characters, but it will still fit. Go on, you're digging a hole.
No, I'm just saying that, look, there are varieties in the United States, but nobody in the United States is thinking about this. You know, the Euro finance minister, who is a socialist, it's not a Le Pen movement, he's a socialist from the Netherlands, said, we are for solidarity, but we don't want solidarity with the people from the southern part of Europe because they spend their money drinking and with women. Okay? This was a socialist. Imagine the right wing what they are.
Well, you know, one of the other things that you did a fascinating New York Times piece about Donald Trump, but you said, look, I've seen this before. I've been there. Silvio Berlusconi did this in Italy. And I was moved by your piece because when you go back and look at the economic and the economic aspirations, or you look at the phenomenon of people feeling left behind and demeaned in a political order, what can evolve? Now, I'm sure that there are many differences between Italy and the United States, but nonetheless, I think there is something authentic about Donald Trump's win and his appeal to people who wanted to see real change. And many of my relatives, I tell people I have 100 relatives in Kansas, Texas, and Oklahoma, 97 of them supported Donald Trump. And it's not because they're bigots and racists. It's because they felt that they had been left behind. They'd fought in Iraq 3 times, came back and didn't have a job, and that Hillary Clinton for them represented more of the same. So I just want to put it on the table. We all have, many of us have connections to that world, but you saw this coming. And I'm interested in what you see, because part of the real discussion, the signal discussion from the noise, is what's going on with a very different kind of nativism that's evolving, I think, in some parts of Europe. Some parts of Europe seem to be resilient, some parts not. Ted, you talked, I think, about the pattern differences in this. I just want to open up to all of you for a moment to sort of talk to me about what your concerns and hopes are about what we and over here see as a very different 1930s type nativist trend in a lot of these countries. Katerina?
Yeah, I would I would actually take issue with the idea that the European project is no longer valid. The European project, and we're celebrating 70 years of the Marshall Plan this year, is actually, the idea was to create a free and whole Europe. And this is still ongoing. I don't need to tell the Americans about Ukraine.
But it feels threatened, right?
It feels threatened, and I can tell you, for many smaller countries, my country included, including of the south of Europe, actually, being a member of the European Union was in a process of democratization, was a process of opening up the market. It was liberal democracy would come out of it. And this is a work in progress. And it's still going on with Eastern Europe and with countries in the Balkans. There is still validity in continuing with the European project. And we can argue about whether the euro was right or wrong for that country or this country, or whether it should be like a smaller group of countries, but we're too way into it right now to turn back.
With all due respect, you're giving the warm and fuzzy picture of Europe for a minute. Europe was also a kind of bureaucratized blob, expanding as nations agreed to change themselves within the acquis communautaire, to agree to live by 80,000 different regulations. And I remember in Star Trek, some of you may remember the Borg. The Borg either annihilated you or assimilated you. And I would tell you that Europe was kind of like the Borg. It was assimilating other societies, which was a stabilization strategy to a certain degree. And I know Ted has written about stabilization and the dangers there, but one of the drivers, I think, inside Europe today is that rejection of bureaucratization, that micromanaging, overreaching bureauccy in Belgium that is driving all of it. So I just want to put that on the table, that it's not, that there's a solid and I think a legitimate complaint that it's not all about democracy.
Yeah, for sure, but if I can just add one point here. For example, like something very bureaucratic like environmental rules. How to get rid of your garbage, how to process them. Things like that weren't self-evident in my country, for example, only came about, and it's still a process of, coming to terms with higher regulations because of the terms of the European Union. And maybe some countries don't need them.
And Luigi, we started this because of Berlusconi, but I mean, tell us what you see now in Europe, maybe outside of Italy, but with that nativism that you wrote about in the Times.
I'm not so worried of the nativists. In Italy, that's not so strong. I think that I'm worried about a comparison, because there are a lot of comparisons between the unification of Italy, which took place a bit more than 150 years ago, and the unification of Europe.
Right.
Both were driven by a small elite that was very inspired and thought that this was, you have to die for it. Both of them happened by accident. Because especially the Italian one happened by accident. And the Italian one, we know how it ended, was a domination of the north over the south and a desertification of the south of Italy. And I think this is going to happen in Europe as well. And it's clear that there are better countries, better run, that are running the show and imposing their rules that are clearly superior rules, but maybe superior rules you cannot live by. And it's as if you go now to Ethiopia and trying to introduce the US rules in Ethiopia, they're not the right rule for Ethiopia, because the environmental rules for Ethiopia, for the United States, are not right for Ethiopia. Every country has its own. No, there are contingent rules, absolutely. And so I think that there is a risk of desertification of the southern part of Europe. And we've seen the consequences.
I want to pick up on the point that you made about the value of the EU in getting.
You want to pick it up, or you want to argue with it?
Well, I want to agree with it, but say that it has some limits and may even be reversible at this point. And I agree that Eastern Europe and to an extent Southern Europe benefited from the process that you described. The difficulty is that the EU, and this is true of other international organizations, by the way, the EU had the most leverage before it admitted nations into the European Union. That was the moment to insist on rectitude in public finances, on, sort of reasonable and honest administration.
But Ted, didn't they do that?
Well, but it turns out that once nations get in, the ability of the EU, as true of other international organizations, to police that turns out to be much lower because they're already in the club. So take a look at
Including
Hungary.
civil rights. Look at Hungary, what's happening.
Take a look at Hungary.
Which is today, probably
Right.
Hungary will not be admitted,
Yeah.
given the record, to the European Union.
But it turns out that it's very difficult to police that once you already have the nation in the EU. And the same thing is true with finances. Because once you're in the European Union and the Eurozone in particular, the EU and the Eurozone will go to almost any length to avoid having you kicked out. They want to preserve the existing membership, and that means not upholding the standards that the Euro and the EU were created to uphold. And I don't see any way out of that paradox, failing the willingness to actually start kicking places out, but that's viewed as self-defeating.
Helga, save us.
So it's a mixture of one English and a German word. I'm going to say something here. I find it quite intriguing how this comparison of Italian reunification with the EU project.
Right.
And I've actually heard many Italian northerners, people from Milano, for example, saying very nasty things about people from Sicily. So I don't think this is a northern European thing that we can be quite nasty, but...
No, absolutely.
So can everybody,
and I grew up in the north, so...
okay.
No, but my grandfather was from Sicily, so I understand all both sides.
You have both, and you're carrying both heritages. The European Union is a peace project. You can say this is a woolly thing, but what is not woolly is that we created standards for the whole of Europe, and this is to the benefit of our companies and actually to the benefit of your companies, American manufacturers who want to export to the European Union. All kinds of other companies. It's a nice thing when you know how this plug has to look like and how it's what's the certificate, the number of the certificate between Slovenia and Finland. If you want this market of 500 million or 510 million people, you need that, and it's a nice thing. And there, I don't think there's.
So this is what we're talking about are the standards.
Yeah,
you're talking about
that's nice. And
Europe is
regulation
Europe.
and regulation is about standards. If you don't put out the standards, there are no standards. And I wish that people in southern Italy have the same standards for their drinking water than people in Finland or Sweden. What's bad about that?
So Helga,
and you need some bureaucracy for that.
Ted has written that Europe has become this experiment that promotes stability at the cost of prosperity. Do I have that right, Ted? Is that pretty much right? And I'm interested because that does seem interesting to me that, whether you go to Germany and you see there's a sort of fiscal culture of responsible fiscal behavior and whatnot, you go other places and it's just different throughout Europe. But nonetheless, as you look at this kind of broad question of how you take care of everyone, there's one of the big differences right now between the United States and I think our European friends is the commitment to really take care of everyone. And Ted, you've written about this and you said, but there's still an urge to prosper, an urge to win, an urge to build capital, an urge to be like Silicon Valley. And that undermines the stability myth, the stability project.
Well, I think my economist colleague here is probably better fit to sort of discourse on this than I am. But just very briefly, I understand, especially after 1945 and 1989 for that matter, a European desire for stability economically and politically, even more important politically. But the more you construct an economic and a political system that values stability, that values what you have today, the tougher it is to have economic growth tomorrow, because you're locking in institutions and ideas, and to a certain extent companies, in today's world. You could call them crony capitalists if you wanted to. And that is desirable in many respects. It makes the bathtub plugs easier to sell all around Europe. That's undeniably true. But what are you doing to tomorrow's firms, tomorrow's entrepreneurs who have different ideas, whose ideas and products can't come to market because the existing European standards all across Europe make it impossible for them to get into the market at all. You don't know about them because they're never going to exist. But those are the jobs and the firms and the ideas of tomorrow. So this whole continent-wide process of rulemaking is undoubtedly great for today's companies and good for today's consumers. It is not good for tomorrow's companies and tomorrow's consumers and tomorrow's ideas and tomorrow's job growth. So with respect, I resist the idea that transatlantic, or God forbid, trans-European, or God forbid, transatlantic standards are in the long run a good thing. They're convenient now.
Can I ask Luigi to respond? Luigi, you teach a class on crony capitalism at Booth, I know, and you also have concerns about companies like Google and the sort of new monopolistic enterprises that are there. And do you look at the world that Helga just described as one that makes life good because all the bathtub plugs will be the same size? But I mean, is that...
This is American manufacturing, the bathtub thing?
Maybe Chinese. But I guess the question is, do you worry about the concentration? Because I'm trying to get at this issue of what some Europeans are reacting to, of feeling overly managed. The nanny state gone crazy.
I will distinguish in the sense, I am a big admirer of Margaret Vestager, who is the European Commissioner for Competition.
Right.
She's a phenomenal woman. She does a terrific job. I wish we had her in the United States, where basically the antitrust is asleep. Okay? So on that, big kudos. When it comes to market, I'm all in favor, like Olga, about having a market. In the United States, I think the choice was better. In the sense, you have a law that allows you to trade freely. You cannot put any restriction to trade, but you don't have the same regulation in every country. There's some overarching regulation that is federal, but there is a lot of stuff that varies at the state level. And the United States, for all their variety, they're much more homogeneous than in Europe. Charles de Gaulle used to say that it's hard to run a country with so many kinds of cheeses. And the United States only have one kind of cheese, which is cheddar. And the American
process.
Yeah. But in
You are
Europe,
good at these tweetable moments.
there are a lot of kind of cheeses in Europe, a lot of culture, a lot of differences. And I think that we want to preserve the differences. And there is a risk, whenever you impose a standard, there is a risk to impose a standard that is in the interest of the country that imposes it, or the organization that imposes it. The Americans have been fantastic in doing that for years, all over the world.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, so I don't think that there's anything intrinsic bad about the country doing it. It's not a nice process. I think that the European Union is, or the people in the European Union, in part reacts to that.
Right. Helga, you gave an Anderson Cooper eye roll when I mentioned nanny states. So I want to, make sure you have an opportunity to respond. But as you do that, and I want Katharina to give a response as well about the coming elections, the coming trends, what you see evolving. But in September we have a German election, and I want you to take off your German political minister hat and put on your German voting citizen hat, and kind of share with us what you really think is evolving in the German political landscape, what the potential blind spots are for us that are watching that, what should we be watching that we're not watching as this election turns up. And Katharina, I know you're not German, but you're watching the whole scene. Is the German election an inflection point where one way it goes, or it gives us one indication of Europe, if it goes another way? And what are the other trends inside Europe that you think matter? But let me start with Helga.
The good thing about the elections is that there is really choice. I mean, we have had this grand coalition. Americans don't know about coalitions, and, well, your knowledge is limited because you've had it once only, and that was the great success, I think. We always have these coalitions, which means political parties and the chancellor, they have to compromise, endless compromise. We're going to end up with another coalition, but it could be another one. But it could as well be the same.
What kind of coalition would you expect?
I actually would expect to, I mean, perhaps it's wishful thinking to have the Liberals in government again, the Greens, and
Are there any
Chancellor
Liberals
Merkel.
left?
Huh?
Are there Liberals left?
I mean, they were at more than 12% at yesterday's elections in the largest federal state, which is great, 12.5%. We have a threshold of 5%. They're most likely going to make it, and they are a liberal party, meaning, I mean, the Social Democrats and the Conservatives, they are parties with a tradition, well, of a strong state. Well, this is a very German tradition anyway, of a strong state that regulates the economy. And we have, I mean, the government gets so much taxes. I mean, government, this is the city, the state, and the federal government. And they're still not talking about tax reform. So I just wish the Liberals would be.
What about these pirates?
They're gone.
They're gone. Gone for good?
They're gone for
Not
good.
back? Okay.
No, they're gone.
So what are we missing? I mean, just before I go to jump to what are we missing that we ought to be alert for as we comment and watch the German election build up?
Just one last line. I think this new right-wing, pretty radical nativist party, Alternative for Germany, they're going to
name it? What is it called?
Alternative for Germany, AfD. They're probably going to make it into parliament, but they will be the I don't know how you call it, the kid nobody wants to play with. So and they have to show for a couple of years that they can actually interact in parliament. But we have a pretty stable political system, and this, I mean, where did it come from? The Allied forces imposed it on us, and there was so much balance in our political system that you just wonder how it could go wrong. This, of course, is for historical reasons, but we don't get to elect the chancellor or the president. I mean, we vote for parliament, and there's a special assembly that votes for the president. So there's so many intermediates.
You're worse than we are.
We're great.
Yeah, great. Katharina?
So I wouldn't expect a surprise in Germany, in the German elections. I wouldn't. I would expect stability to prevail no matter who wins or how they form the government exactly. The whole of Europe is expecting the German elections, and I understand a lot of Americans as well, to clear the slate, as to speak, as to what happens next for Europe. But on a wider point I'd like to make is, like, when we always think of the political cycle, and we have 28, soon to be 27 countries, and we have to take into account every single election in order to make our next step moving forward with the European Union, that's a problem. And that has been a problem that is underlined by the crisis, actually. So one thing that went wrong in the management of the crisis is that it kind of turned everyone almost instinctively, I would say, to intergovernmentalism. And kind of, we forgot about the community method that was there to actually promote the interests of the whole European project, as a whole, the European Union. Even if that means that some parcel, one country or the other, will have to let go of the political cycle considerations in order to take account of the bigger picture. So unless we go back to the community method, or even majority voting for some of the decisions needed. And of course, deeper integration, including fiscal integration.
Germans don't want fiscal integration. Yeah. Do you? Do you want any form of fiscal integration?
It's actually being discussed, and by the foreign minister, who is a social democrat anyway, but the chancellor seems to be much more open for it now.
And getting to know Helga, that seems like a positive yes than probably a no. Let me ask the four of you just for short answers before I go out to the audience. But two of the other big issues, the shocks that Europe has dealt with, are terrorism and the refugee crisis from Syria, Iraq, and the crises in the area. I remember, if any of you watched TV on the day the Brussels airport was bombed and you were watching NBC, that was me. I was there when the bomb went off. So I taped people that were even closer to the bomb blast. It was a terrifying thing, but it showed a lot of both the great sides of what was going on inside Europe, but particularly Belgium at that point with their security. It also showed weak spots. I got out of the country that day and I shouldn't have been able to. It was sort of interesting things that went on. But terrorism has been a big, big shock, and you can feel it whenever. And the refugee crisis. And so I'm interested in, you basically cover different terrains and how you look at it. But what should we be looking at over this next year of destiny for Europe? We'll go back to the original title. Where do terrorism and refugees fit in that picture? Helga?
Terrorism, I wouldn't say that we have learned the lesson, but we have progressed in that. We have realized that there are real pockets of quite dangerous people. Some of them with a background, Turkish or an Arab background in an Arab country, but of course converts as well. I mean, people who look, I don't know, Scandinavian, Germans, yeah. Italian, and they're self-radicalized. They become converts, and they're pretty frightening. They've gone to Syria and fought there in the civil war.
But my question, so is that on a burner level of burner level 1, meaning you can tolerate it? Is it at burner level 5? Is it burner level 10 and red hot?
No, it's at least in Germany, but I think in all other member states as well. There is more expectation that governments do something about that, and there is more integration of security forces, of secret services, and information sharing. And they're now in Brussels. There's a discussion about introducing something like a European ESTA system. So when people travel to be visa-free to the European Union, it's a waiver system with a lot of exchange of information before people enter.
And you think that visa waiver system is going to remain internal visa waiver?
Internal
you think
visa waiver?
The Schengen agreement is going to survive all this?
Oh yeah, of course.
So that's a tweetable moment.
Of course.
And real quickly on refugees.
On refugees, the European Union has become extremely active in concluding agreements with what I would call the soft belly of the European Union, the countries, the other coast of the Mediterranean. And
who's the soft belly countries?
It's Tunisia, Libya, Algeria. This is countries where there's some Syrian refugees, but many people from the Sahel zone, and for them, Europe is I mean, this is the countries where you want to be. And even being a taxi driver, if you're from some poor Sahel zone country, you can send money home and you can give your children an education. So this is the promised land. The problem is that we cannot give shelter to all these people who want to see the promise fulfilled. And
do you regret the numbers you took in?
I don't, but it's a task for a generation to integrate them.
Ted?
For 500 or so years, Europe was primarily a place that people left. Of course, there was, some movement into Europe, but by and large, my ancestors, the ancestors of a good many people in this audience, are of primarily or exclusively European origin. The United States was built on the idea, among others, that it was going to be an integrating society. Now, I worry a good deal that we do that less well than we used to, but we're still not terrible at it. Europe's experience with very high levels of extra-European immigration, I'm not with respect counting people moving from Eastern Germany to Western Germany in the years after World War II, Europe's experience there is very short. Is Europe going to be able to become an integrating sort of society, bearing in mind that, in my view, what you need to integrate people are, first and foremost, a nationalist ideology for them to sign on to. You need some national identity if you want to become part of a nation, and the European Union is dedicated to the eradication of national identities. That's a negative. And secondly, they need jobs. You need to go to work. There is nothing more powerfully integrating over the long haul than working in society with other people who were born there and grew up there. Well, the European Union is anti-national identity, and it's got a terrible record on job creation. Look at the record of youth unemployment. Therefore, I don't think this is going to work out very well.
Thank you for that not optimistic thought. Katerina.
But I mean, I would like to push back a little bit on that and ask you whether you think that.
Just real quickly, because we got to get to that.
Yeah, for sure. But the Brexit and how it came along. Do you think that people were mostly concerned about the Syrian refugees or the people from
Polish plumber.
or Poland. The Polish plumber?
Poland.
Okay, so the integration thing is doesn't really have to do with a different religion so much as to the threat of someone getting your job or someone stealing your job from you.
If you have high growth and high job growth, many of those problems can be manageable, although there will always be cultural issues and there will always be local issues. Okay. But if you don't have high job growth, that problem becomes much, much, much worse.
And one thing on Greece, given that most of the people who ended up in Germany and other countries came from Greece and passed by Greece, and some of them are still there. It is. And we have some agreement with Turkey as well as the European Union to deal with this issue. Right now, it's kind of on ice, the whole thing. It's not exploding as it did like a couple of summers ago. But I would like to just raise your attention to the likelihood of this thing exploding again, especially as we see President Erdogan and his relationship with the European Union getting worse. And, given what has happened with the borders and the closed borders in the Western Balkans and what have you, I'm very concerned as a Greek that the new wave of immigration will be stuck in Greece. And, this is something that we'll have to take care of.
Is that your news story tomorrow? Because Erdogan will be in D.C. tomorrow.
He's going to be.
So we're right. I want to say we're on the cutting edge of news here. Luigi, finally, terrorism and refugees.
Actually, I think that we have forgotten the most important event of this coming year, which are the Italian election. The German election are completely irrelevant because there is so much stability. The Italian election can be devastating for Europe.
Walk us through that real fast.
So by February of next year, the election should be called. Probably it will be called in September, but most likely, a lot of possibilities in February. And the Democratic Party, the one of Prime Minister Renzi, is probably going to be the second party. The first party is going to be the party run by a comedian. Now, you have Al Franken as a comedian, being a senator, so we're not unique in that. But is kind of a populist party that might end up winning a majority in both sides of the both chambers. So, and they have no experience in governing. They have no clear ideology. And they profess themselves against the euro. They want to have a referendum. Now, you cannot have a referendum on the euro because you're going to have a bank run the moment you start the referendum.
So Luigi offers that. You watch the Italian election. He offers that dispassionately and with no bias whatsoever. So we'll do this. But let me open up the floor to now comments and questions from the floor. And I'm going to take questions from you. We'll make them short, super short answers, please. And we're going to take some from the web as well, because there's a whole big lineup. This gentleman here, because I'm scared of him. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Who are you?
I'm Andrei Rusu. I'm the Trade Commissioner of Romania in Chicago. Yeah, I have two short comments.
How's it going?
Yeah, very well, actually. Yeah.
Good.
So I have two short comments and two questions.
No, you can't. You can take one comment and one question. We don't have time.
Fair. So a comment. I think it's unfair to say that people in Europe, they don't want to work, because we are seeing that, for instance, in northern countries, they are getting to a 4 days weekday. So, yeah. And
good comment. Okay. Question.
Yeah. And the question is, do you see a segregation between North and South in Europe, and economically speaking, and why? And additionally, where is the place of France in this?
Economic separation. Ted, you're good on separations.
Yes, there is a separation, not a segregation, but a separation. The euro doesn't help, but it primarily originates in bad economic policy decisions taken in the southern European nations.
I feel you're both so enthusiastic. We'll go here and then here, yeah, but we'll work it around real fast. You did real well there, sir. So one quick question.
All right, here's my question to all of you.
The only one is going to answer, but that's okay. Go ahead.
All right. What would you say is causing in your own opinions, what would you all say is causing a backlash against institutions like the European Union?
Thank you. So let me put this in Helga's camp. Helga, what is driving the resistance for the mothership?
Yes, of course, the very popular notion that the cucumbers are being, I mean, there's a standard for cucumbers set by Brussels. Apparently this was the case, but they did away with it. And we have our politicians very often talk about Europe as if Europe was something completely separate. So nasty things are coming out of Europe, but I'm your leader and I'm doing the nice things. So that's of course a huge problem, because all of us are Europe, and national governments very often they demand that the Commission regulates on something. So communication is really key, and I'm very happy that there are now pro-Europe demonstrations in Europe. You see a lot of young people, and they start singing. They have, flags. They do very populist things, and they're on the media, which is important.
Mm-hmm. Catherine, let me ask you a question that's come in from the web. China has offered Greece financial support with the expansion of their One Belt, One Road initiative. What risks or opportunities exist with China? And I'm going to piggyback on this. At Davos this year, an extraordinary thing happened. Xi Jinping came in and took over Davos. So first time a major Chinese leader spoke there and said, look, America's misbehaving, but don't worry, we will save the global trading system and we will defend all the progress made in climate change. And China postured as the savior of the global public goods that much of the world did. So China is now offering your country goodies. Are you worried about the price tag? What's your view on China, real quickly?
Well, the experience of Greece with Chinese investment so far has been good. And it didn't start all rosy, and it started before the crisis, actually, with the investment in Piraeus port of COSCO. And now I understand in China there were some agreements for further investment in the energy sector, power plants and what have you. For a country like Greece that lost almost a third of its GDP for the past 7 years, an investment is worth looking into. And the ones that have actually materialized so far are making sure that the European Union regulations are still, because Greece is a member of the European Union, obviously, is still holds. So any danger or fear of the locals that the price, the quality of the environmental rules, or what the employees of these companies would be paid would be lower standards haven't materialized. So. As long as, the European Union standards are being kept, then,
Helga, do you worry about China? I saw you nodding.
I do worry about China, and in Germany you now have not just a popular sentiment, but against too much investment from China, but also in government there's a backslash, because you see very strategic investment in high-tech companies and with a lot of money behind it, and so we really have to get our act together, and we're probably going to create something like CFIUS in Europe.
Does your question touch on Italy at all? No? Then you got to hold. How about yours? Can it be a little bit on Italy, and we'll go to you next?
Yes.
Okay,
one
good.
of the big issues that hasn't been mentioned is the euro itself.
Right.
If you think of the Eurozone as if the National Football League operated on the basis that each year the teams that did best got to draft best, and the teams that did worst drafted last, and that went on year after year, how long will the National Football League last? And the Eurozone is basically operating how the National Football League would be if they had the draft done the other way.
So Luigi, I don't know if you follow football. I don't know anything about sports. I follow sumo, and I know about all the yokozuna, and there may be a sumo metaphor, but I'm going to throw this at you. Great question about the euro, because you did do this. I mean, basically, I think the gentleman is asking that the methodology of management of the euro is not one designed to integrate, but really it seems to kind of further that, exacerbate some of the two-speed Europe problems.
I like the analogy or the juxtaposition between American sport and European sport, because I think that the American sport is very socialistic. It's actually strange because it's the only thing that is socialist in America is in sport, where you redistribute talents and you have salary caps. You have all the things that nobody wants. They have them in sport. And the only thing that really Europe does well
really
is
socialism
soccer.
among oligarchs.
But then the only thing that Europe does really well is soccer. It's very competitive, and
so back to the euro.
Yeah, the euro I think is a problem because some countries, Italy is first, but also Greece should not have entered. And now they're entering, they can only survive if there are some policies to make them survive, and these policies are not going to be adopted, at least not in my lifetime.
This gentleman, whom I cut off because you were not in the Italy corner, but go ahead.
This is for Ted. Dean Acheson famously said years ago, Britain has lost an empire but not yet found a role. What do you see as Britain's role post-Brexit vis-a-vis Europe, and in particular the United States, and is the special relationship going to have another fresh run?
Lee, very good to see you.
Great question.
Yes, the special relationship is not going to have another run. It's going to continue. We're still on Act 1 of the special relationship. I think there are opportunities with Brexit for the U.S. and the UK to do a few more things together, especially a free trade deal. There are possibilities also on the military side, although our military and intelligence cooperation is already so close that there is only really, I think, tweaking left to do on that score. The British view of the world...
Does that stay stable if Scotland leaves and all that stuff about nuclear weapons? And you're giving us a rosy picture.
It stays stable because Scotland's not going to leave.
Okay. Another tweetable moment.
In a nutshell. British view of the world, very simple. Britain's going to remain profoundly interested in Europe because of where it is, but it's going to devote a little more attention to places that aren't in Europe. And on the whole, I think that's a good thing.
Thank you. Lady in stripes.
Katerina, you had touched on this earlier about Turkey and President Erdogan. So now, obviously, for many years, Turkey has talked about joining the EU. Do you think within the next 5 to 10 years, Turkey should eventually join the EU? And if so, what would any of the EU members expect from Turkey?
Can we make that a yes, no?
Yeah, the way it's going, I don't think it's more likely than it was like 5 years ago.
I mean, I would turn it back on you. You think the way Erdogan is behaving, that he has any bet that he believes he would get in the European Union? My answer would be very much no. Yeah, right. I just feel bad about the people in the very back. I really want to thank you for being in the back row and asking a question. I don't know who you are. Tell us who you are.
Lev Holubek. I'm a Ukrainian American, so I'm going to ask a question.
And you're close to the bar, I see.
A little bit to do with Ukraine. First of all, I'd just like to commend Professor Zingales for Juventus, who you talk about soccer, but great success story from corruption to success. So
yes.
They're good luck to them.
Yes. So quick question.
Mr. Broman, question for you. A couple of facts here just laid out. You had mentioned that the European project is almost anti-nationalist, against nationalist agenda.
Form.
And take a country like Ukraine, where a plurality of ethnicities died, for the concept of Europe. What is the answer? If the European Union is not the answer, and is it the League of Nations again? Is it the United Nations? What is the answer?
Great question. What's the answer, Ted?
That's a fantastic
I want
question.
Helga to answer this too, because I know she has the answer.
Look, anyone who says they've got an answer is probably kidding themselves. But let me sketch out two things. The first thing is resisting Russian imperialism, right? Because regardless of where you think Ukraine should go or ought to go or might be able to go, when you have Russian troops, let's be honest about who it is, occupying a minimum of 1/10 of Ukraine, an open, blatant attack on a European nation, the first forcible change of borders that has been sustained in Europe post-1945, I'm really not interested in stage 2. I have been, and the Heritage Foundation have been, in favor of distributing heavy arms to the Ukrainians to inflict casualties on the Russians. I think it's vital that we start sending Russians back in body bags to make sure that they start paying a price for actually attacking European nations. once you get
Ted, let me ask you a quick
stability.
question. You said something so important right now, and I want to make some news. Why do you believe the Trump people, when they were running for president in the platform committee in Cleveland, worked so hard to get that provision that you so much wanted removed?
Because I think that the Trump administration has set out its stall, at least when they were running for office. It's less clear this will be their stand now that they're in office. Administrations of all types almost always change once they get in and see how tough things are. Remember that one of now President Trump's points of view was that we had intervened too much. Right? Iraq,
right.
Libya. I think that he, at the time at least, viewed a potential U.S. involvement in Ukraine as more of the same. With all due respect to the president, I didn't agree with that then, and I don't agree with it now. After you stabilize the Russian situation, then, and I'm under no illusions about how tough this is, you have to start dealing with an incredibly dysfunctional and corrupt Ukrainian political and economic system. Because without a moderate degree of competence in the Ukrainian regime, the idea of any further advances are nonsensical.
Helga, I want to ask you how you're going to answer the same question, but there's also a question from the web that's a big world question. How is German society adjusting to its relatively new role as defender of Europe and perhaps defender of the West? So back to the hedge. I mean, Angela Merkel is called by many people the leader of the free world right now.
Yeah.
So how is that going?
That's a very American thing, but I'd really like to respond to that question.
Yeah, you can respond to both.
Yeah, I do that. You could really, I mean, if you don't believe in the European Union, perfectly okay. We never asked the US to join, and you could not join. But the European Union really organized European member states for sanctions against Russia and showed a lot of political resolve in doing that, and this actually happened quite quickly. So just see us as your friends on the other side of the Atlantic, because we worked hand in hand on this issue when Russia had annexed Crimea. The defender of the West, this is like the defender of Christianity. I don't know. We cannot be the leader of the free world. We can perhaps show.
Let me put it in a different way. There was a time, particularly I remember with Ronald Reagan and others, where the United States positioned itself as the beacon on the hill. And for right now, that's not going so well. Maybe it's going to be back. I don't know. I think that I have a view that the Trump administration, there's a pathway to it actually succeeding and restoring some of these things. But that's another session and another day at the Chicago Council Bar. But I'm interested in right now, when it comes to these principles about open society, about inclusivity, about these kinds of moments and civil rights and human rights. Germany, it appears to many, whether you like it or not, as the beacon on the hill. So how are you rejecting that, or are you accepting it?
Yeah, well, people can see in German society and government what they please, but usually, if Germany is the defender of the West, this is more than projecting something or doing I mean, the U.S. is also about projecting power in many ways that we can not do and we will not do. The German aircraft carriers are not policing the Pacific nor the Atlantic, because we don't have a single one. We don't have a different from the UK, of course, and France, and perhaps at some point we're going to get there. So what we can do is show an example of a society that tries to have learned from its terrible history and tries to live diversity. I mean, it doesn't work all the time, and tries to not be nasty and mired in self-interest at all times. Tries to be idealistic about the refugee issue, for example.
Katerina, I just want to acknowledge that I know that ancient Greece was the original beacon on the hill.
Yes.
So just want to put that on the table. Yes, this gentleman right here.
Hi, Steve. This is directed at you. First of all, thank you for moderating this event.
Sure.
Secondly, when you came out,
you
made
scare
me. Sorry. When you came out, you made it seem as if it were a for sure story that President Trump had released information to Russia regarding classified U.S. information.
Right.
I wanted to set the record straight that the White House has denied this story, and the Washington Post was the only news source to cover this story, making me skeptical of its validity. I also wanted to charge you to please use your position for promoting truth and not showing your bias to the audience. Thank you.
Well, I shared with you that 97 of my relatives voted for Donald Trump, so I appreciate your perspective, as I always try whatever to be objective. On the Washington Post story, what is true about that is that intelligence officials outside of the White House are trying to solve this issues with allies that have concerns about that. That's the reported piece. So what may have transpired between Kislyak, the ambassador of Russia, who was not even listed in the White House readout on that meeting, and that had to come out through other media organizations. Look, if they were fully transparent, it would be much easier. H.R. McMaster is someone I have tremendous and profound respect for. He was in the meeting and said that nothing illicit or wrong happened. That's his statement. But when you see the coordination with other allies, which does get reported out, then that drives the question of what that went through. So I appreciate what you put on the table. I work very hard to kind of maintain freedom. I did not believe, just to be candid, that Hillary Clinton was the be-all that necessarily would have worked. But we're at a time where, in these kinds of things, I would push back very hard that Steve Clemons brings to bear any kind of bias. But quoting a Washington Post report that was released on this is good enough for me right now, and it will stand the test of time. And if they have to walk it back, we'll see if they walk it back. Certainly it's not truth, but I tell you, if you were a journalist, it's very, very challenging in this environment to cover an administration that's decided to go to war with us, the media. So just kind of keep that in mind as well, and we'll both be square. How's that? Cool. Thank you for your comment. Yes. Yes, this gentleman.
Yes, on immigration, I'm wondering, why haven't the Europeans gotten together and come down hard on Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, to absorb some of this? Because culturally, linguistically, they're closer. They need the labor. Saudi Arabia gets almost all their labor from all over the world. And they've contributed somewhat to the problem. I just don't hear anything about it.
Quick thoughts, Luigi?
I don't think that Saudi Arabia is easy to push around. I think that the problem of Libya is gigantic, not only sort of for what is in there, but also as a channel. And since Libya let a lot of people from Nigeria and that part of Africa come through and reach Europe. So I don't think those are necessarily homogeneous to Saudi Arabia people. So I think that is really a big challenge.
We're trying to set a world record of the number of questions we can get in at Chicago. Are we doing okay, Neve? Yeah, great. Okay, cool. Other questions, comments? Yes, this gentleman right here.
How do you see the Schengen agreement changing with the new developments in terrorism and the refugee crisis?
Great. Helga, you said it wasn't going to change at all, but
it has changed because they're more internal controlling than ever before.
So what does that mean technically? What is more internal? So for those that don't know the technical details, what has actually changed within the system as a result of there? If we go into France, or we move to Greece, or what's technically different today?
So, I mean, it used to be the case that you could move from Germany to France as you move from Washington D.C. to Maryland.
Right.
But now there are more checks, but not at a certain point as it used to be in former times. That were still, yeah. But
papers.
it's not just papers. It's also computer. I mean, don't forget, Schengen is a system of information sharing that's so valuable that we don't know what the UK wants out of Europe, but it wants to still remain part of that information sharing that's done via Schengen, not part of the Schengen system, but these information sharing computer systems, and they just check on more cars, so there are more policemen and women in the field. And what is also important, we are now finally making an effort to protect our external borders, which is really important. And there's much more funding for that, and there are more police officers, and it's a unified police force. So the European Union is not, yes, it's also about stability, but it's not stagnation. We're learning from mistakes and from crises that are going on.
Katerina, any quick comments on Schengen?
Well, I think that I understand that the security situation is such that you have to control the borders. Once you do that, I think we should go back to the previous system of free transit between countries. This is the whole point of the European Union.
Thank you. This gentleman right here.
Why has the European project failed so badly in Hungary in terms of defending human rights and liberal democracy?
Fascinating question. Ted?
It's a really good question. I mentioned earlier that the EU has less leverage once you get in, so that's a factor. I would suggest that, and I hope I'm not offending any Hungarian Americans in the audience here, I would suggest that there are different levels of lowercase l liberality in European political traditions across the continent. That some places, I would instance Britain in particular, are extremely lowercase l liberal societies. Other places, like France, have a somewhat slightly different liberal tradition, but are also quite liberal. Some other places, perhaps Hungary, have a weaker lowercase l liberal tradition. These are sort of matters where I'm reluctant to be very dogmatic because there's a lot of history, and even internally there's a lot of differences between culture, et cetera, et cetera. But that would just be sort of my starting point, is that Europe is a very old place with a lot of differences, and one difference is the attitude towards the relationship of the individual to the state, and whether or not rights are inherent in the individual, which is the core of the liberal tradition, or are something that is granted on sufferance by the state, and therefore can be removed, which is an illiberal tradition. So I would just suggest that that's a possibility.
I just, as we go into the very final couple of minutes, I want to ask all of you for just very short responses, and in the spirit of the gentleman's question, who asked the question about fairness. I had written this piece about Donald Trump's kind of shock style in national security issues, and allies, pushing allies on edge, and NATO on edge. And I realize that NATO is a different kind of question than the one we're having here today. And I argued that there was a lot of strategic inertia built in to alliances and the way we were doing things, and there could actually be some good that came out of shaking these alliances up, because then you had to fight for what you believed in and what was going to be most efficacious for the future. When I was at the NATO summit in Warsaw, there were 3 lines in the protocols out of 250 things on cyber, for instance. It seemed to be very backward oriented. So there is a case to be made that Donald Trump's shock therapy with allies could end up being positive. But I also think, from traveling around the world, that every close ally of the United States today has palpable doubt about America's willingness to be there with them in a time of need. Whether that's real or not, the trust has been shaken. So we can argue both sides for a minute. And I'm wondering, just as we close out, as you think about Europe, because we haven't talked about that element of stress, part of the reality of Europe is that it's had a good buddy standing by it all the time with no doubt. I think doubt is now part of the game. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Any thoughts? Helga?
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's distrust, but we just don't know what the next day brings. And the Chancellor was here and had actually a good meeting with the President, but next morning I saw those tweets and I thought, well, did he reconsider? Is this a new view on the meeting he had, or is this just the next day? So, yes, there is something positive. Sometimes there is something positive about shock therapy, but don't overdo the shock.
Ted?
One of the core issues in U.S.-European NATO relations right now is our European defense contributions.
Right.
This has been a gripe the United States has had since the early 1950s. Very little has changed. President Trump's comments on this, though a little bit more pointed, aren't that much different.
Obama said them.
Obama said them.
Said
Dean
them.
Acheson said them, for crying out loud. We've heard this for a long time. So my comment on this is very simple. I've always believed that higher levels of European defense spending are essential, not so much for Europe to acquire defense capabilities, although that is useful.
Right.
They are vital in order to maintain American political support for NATO.
Katharina? Oops.
I wouldn't like to say what happened with the Greek-German relationship happening with the transatlantic one. So there is a healthy dose. I guess populism can only take you so far. And if your default position is populism, then that might actually create some problems in the transatlantic relationship.
Luigi?
I think that NATO was crucial to maintain peace in Europe. Everybody says about the European project. I think NATO was even probably more important than the European project. So I'm very worried about anything that undermines that.
And with that, we're done. I want to thank Luigi Zingales, Katharina Socu, Theodore Bromond, and Helga Barth. I think we covered an awful lot of ground in a very short period of time. Thank you to the viewers online, and thank you to all of you. Thank you. Yeah.